Europe is also in a wide range, and unfortunately, it's a very narrow range.
Good morning, Bruno.
Good morning, Kias.
What's happening with the US equity markets?
Well, it's doing something great. It's making a new highs above the 2193 high of August. And it has been rising in the last 3 weeks very strongly. Volatility and VIX, the fear index, came down all the way below 13%. And we see the momentum has been turning up, and it's still rising strongly.
So, on the daily charts, was the market not overbought?
Well, here we have to differentiate a little bit. Indeed, we see the last 3 weeks, the rise up. We see that the daily stochastics is in the overbought area. But this is a special case when the weekly is already rising, as we saw. This indicate not the risk of a pullback, but that indicate a strong market, which is going to continue in that direction with only small and minor pullbacks.
Will the 10-year US rate rise affect the US equity markets?
Well, let's look at the weekly chart. Of course, when you're right to point out that rates have been rising quite a lot from 175 to 235. In theory, people think it affects equity, but here we are at very low levels. And also, here we are finally breaking a long-term downtrend. So at these levels, it does not have a negative impact, on the contrary.
So how is the US financial sector looking?
Yes, the main beneficiary is basically the financial sector. It is doing so because people expect the margins of banks to widen with rising interest rates. And during the same rise of the interest rate, you see the extraordinary outperformance of the financial sector. And you see on a relative strength basis versus the S&P, it's also a very outperforming sectors. But it's not alone. Let's look also at industrials. Of course, some of the news regarding infrastructures have been helping that recently, and you see the relative strength rising strongly during the same period. Also, discretionary, that means that people are confident to buy goods and they are confident more about growth. And we see here making new highs just very recently and a rising relative strength. And finally, the fourth sector, which is now rising, is energy. Energy is making a new high compared to the previous ones, and we'll see the relative strength of energy versus the S&P 500 is here on orange, moving higher, and momentum is also very positive.
So does that mean that oil prices could rise again?
Well, let's look at the weekly chart of oil. We remember that since basically 6 months, oil has been between 52 and 43. Moving back to 43 recently, and in the last 2 weeks rebounding nicely. So the fact that it's moving toward 50, and if it moves above 50 to 51, then it certainly will continue to help the energy sector versus the S&P 500. So we have 4 sectors out of 8 which are moving up. That's going to continue.
So is oil influencing any emerging markets?
Usually it does, and here, for example, if we look at Brazil, we see that we are now at the end of the correction, and the relative strength in the last 2 weeks where oil has been moving up has been rebounding a little bit. So it has a positive, in fact, impact on Brazil, on emerging markets. Momentum is moving up. What we should recall is that during the whole of 2016, we had a big uptrend, and now it has been replaced by a kind of a sideways trading range. And it's not so clear that in the coming weeks, emerging market will continue to outperform the S&P 500. That remains to be confirmed.
So is Europe also in a wide range?
Europe is also in a wide range, and unfortunately, it's a very narrow range. We are still between 3,100 and 2,900 on the Euro stocks. And despite the fact that US equity are rising quite well, here you see the lack of rise of the Euro stocks. And this is really a worry. We see that the relative strength has been declining now for all the months of November. We hope that it's going to end soon, but there is no confirmation yet.
So is Japan Nikkei also rising along the US equity?
Fortunately, Japan is doing something great, not only outperforming the S&P 500, it is doing so with the fact that the yen is declining against the dollar. And here we have a break up in the last 3 weeks, which is even giving an additional signal. It's on a weekly basis moving above 18,000, which is the upper part of the clouds. So that's open long-term, a more bullish outlook for Japan. So basically, we've got the US doing well, we've got Japan doing well, we've got emerging market kind of neutral with Europe. So the conclusion is relatively bullish news so far, probably until the end of the year.
Well, thank you, Bruno, for joining us in the studio.
You're welcome.
And thank you at home for watching. Don't forget to click back on our channel to watch other interviews with Bruno. Goodbye for now.